Oh, this is going to be awful. Sorry. I'm going to sound like a monster for a second. I would rather do, literally, I would rather do 100 funerals than one wedding. Just a sec. It's not merely inconvenience, and it's not merely wedding planners, although that does factor in a little bit. Funerals are very focused because for the people that you're working with, this is for some of them the worst day of their life, or one of the worst days. And to be able to be there and to give a Christian witness and to help them through that in a Christian way is a wonderful thing. And I find it very edifying, hopefully for them, for me as well. Weddings, however, become their own thing with different customs but it's funny we don't talk about the origin of the customs. I wonder if people come from very different cultures to the West, Canada, United States, Europe. I wonder what they think of some of our wedding customs. The fact that we dress the bridesmaids in heinously terrible. I honestly think, are you like me where you think the bride actually picks a terrible color? Or anyway, and they dress identically. I don't know if you know this or not, but actually, I'll come to that in a second. Let me tell you a couple of other ones. The best man wasn't originally your best friend or your brother. Your best man was the biggest, strongest guy you could find, because he was this is true. He was actually meant to defend the actual wedding ceremony from anybody who would come and interrupt it. And also, he was to stand guard on the wedding night outside of the chamber for exactly the same reason. Anybody who wanted to come and interrupt it, that was your interference guy. So picking a linebacker would probably be the best choice for best man. Carrying the bride across the threshold, which some people still do. It was thought, especially in Northern European culture, that evil spirits dwelt around the doorways of dwellings. And that a woman could be cursed if she stepped across, because cursing the bride early on in the marriage was it's the mother-in-law's job to do that. But the groom would carry the bride across to protect her. Literally, it was protection from these evil spirits. Going back to the bridesmaids, originally it wasn't just the bridesmaids dressed the same and the bride had the beautiful dress. The bride and the bridesmaids all dressed the same. And in the beginning, all of them were veiled. And the reason was, if evil spirits were coming to curse the bride at the wedding ceremony, they literally couldn't tell which one the bride was. So your bridesmaids were there to run interference for you against the forces of evil, because they wouldn't know until the very last minute who was answering the questions. So there's where your heinous teal-colored bridesmaid dresses comes from. But I wanted to talk this morning, I brought this up because of the veil. Veils in the Bible serve different purposes. One is a source of revealing something, and primarily the second source is to conceal or to separate things. And we have this interesting, the entire focus of this Exodus passage seems to be not just that Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, which he did a number of times, but when he comes down, he's unaware of the fact that his face is shining with the reflected glory of God. And so powerful is that it terrifies Aaron and everyone else. So they ask him to veil himself to protect them from that. And it's kind of interesting that the reflected glory of God would be a source of terror to them. I'm a big believer in this, that the enemies of God find beautiful things ugly. And I think those who are following God find truth and beauty beautiful. And it's telling that the people at this time were not ready to receive God's truth. And that's why that reflected glory was overwhelming to them and terrifying, and the reason that Moses had to veil himself. And then we have on a different mountain this passage from Luke, where Peter and John and James have been invited up. and Jesus is transfigured before them. And transfiguration basically is that they see Jesus' true glory, along with Moses and Elijah, literally the lawgiver and the greatest of the prophets, showing that Jesus didn't come to destroy the law and the prophets, but to complete them. And it's interesting that Peter, John, and James did not need to be shielded from this. So there's been, they are in a place where they can now see God's truth and bear it. However, and this is why I love the apostles, just like us, there's a misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding comes from poor Peter always tries to kick in the little extra. You ever had a friend, I do this, where they'll talk, and then they'll just keep going, and you're like, oh dude, you should have just stopped at that, and instead you went over here. I imagine politicians, speechwriters are like that. Don't go off script. Oh, for the love of God, why are you talking about that? And Peter, well-meaning all the time, always kicks in that little extra that needs to be rebuked by Jesus. Here, he's actually rebuked by God himself. What does he say that's bad? Not bad, but not right. Master, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And then it adds, not knowing what he said. And you'd think, why is this bad? Peter's just he's trying to serve them. He's trying to give them a place to dwell. And I can't imagine this. I've said some stupid things in my time, but while he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. And then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." In other words, shut up and listen to what Jesus, not just hear what Jesus is saying, but listen to what he's saying to you. Being rebuked by God must have been a truly earth-shakingly terrifying experience for Peter. But why? Because all of the gods up to this point in history are inbuilt into the shrines that people built for them. The Greeks and the Romans would build these fantastically beautiful statues, but their belief is that then on earth the god would come and actually dwell in that piece of stone, stuck to that point and place, so that they could go and visit it. So who's in control of that? Well, the human beings are, because Poseidon or Athena was in that wooden statue or later stone statue in that temple where I can go then and offer sacrifice, and then they will give me stuff. Peter is still making a mistake that this is the type of God he's dealing with. I will build you a place to live. But this is the God, remember, if we go back to Moses, that went with his people through the 40 years in the wilderness, traveling with them. This is a God that is not fixed to a certain place or a time, and is not at our behest, but travels with us in all of the difficulties of our life, when we're blind and when we can see. Christ has tried all the way through his ministry to impart this upon the apostles, and they still haven't gotten it to this point. They are open through not having to be veiled, Christ being veiled, so that they were able to bear his glory. But they didn't yet fully understand. That understanding will come after Christ dies and rises again. Because we know, even at that point, they knew, but they didn't fully believe. They had to see the empty tomb. And for Thomas, he had to put his fingers in the nail wounds on his hand and see him, and put their fingers in his side to understand exactly what had happened. So, we are very much like this. And when we pray, it's to have the vision that Christ wants us to have, and to see things the way Christ wants us to see them, and to understand that this is not history. It's not a history book. This is a diary of our relationship with the one living God. And people have often said, this Old Testament God who seems angry a lot of the time and seems wrathful, doesn't seem to match up with Jesus. We have to understand, and especially this is a great passage to look at here in Exodus, that we weren't ready to bear those truths. And the reason the Bible's a diary is it shows the development of the revelation of God through human history. And it took hundreds of generations for us to learn until finally we get to the point where Christ can come. And we can hear the message and then live that out. So for us today, we're going to have vestry right after this service. A shameless plug, huh? There we go. We're going to have vestry right after this. And I want you to stay, but also in between when you're getting your coffee and you're coming back up, please say a prayer for discernment so that we can see God's will for this parish and for us collectively as the daughters and sons of God. So that we can see with God's lens and not our own. So that we ourselves can help, like Moses, to reflect that glory. The glory of God, not our own, but God's glory back into the world.